Listen closely. On a storm-soaked highway where even help was afraid to come, a broken luxury car met a woman society had already written off. She was poor, covered in grease, and fighting every day just to survive. He was powerful, wealthy, and used to the world bowing before him. That night, neither of them knew that a simple act of kindness would slowly rewrite their destinies and challenge everything they believed about love, class, and sacrifice. The rain had been falling since sunset, heavy and relentless, turning the narrow roadside into a river of mud and broken dreams. The workshop lights flickered once, then steadied, casting a yellow glow over rusted tools and half-repaired engines. Inside that small, tin-roofed garage stood Eileen, sleeves rolled up, hands blackened with grease, her hair tied back in a careless knot. At 26, life had already taught her lessons most people never wanted to learn. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and leaned over the engine of an old delivery van. The owner had promised to pay tomorrow, just like the last 3 customers. Promises were cheap, survival was not. In a world where men laughed at her presence, doubted her skills, and called her stubborn for choosing such a profession, Eileen had learned to rely on only 2 things: her hands and her integrity. "Come on, don't do this to me now," she muttered, tightening the last bolt. The engine coughed, then roared to life. She allowed herself a small smile, brief, controlled. Happiness was a luxury she couldn't afford to get used to. Just as she was closing the hood, thunder cracked so loudly it shook the metal walls. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like an angry warning. Eileen reached for her jacket when she heard it, a distant horn, weak and uneven, swallowed by the storm. She paused. Out here, help rarely came, and neither did people ask for it. The horn sounded again. Against her better judgment, Eileen grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The rain soaked her instantly, cold and biting. Down the road, barely visible through sheets of rain, stood a car that did not belong here. Sleek, black, expensive. The kind of vehicle she had only seen in magazines or passing through the city center. She hesitated. Rich people didn't stop on roads like this. And when they did, they rarely treated people like her with respect. Still, someone was stranded. Eileen jogged toward the car, boots splashing through water. The driver's window rolled down slowly. Inside sat a man in his mid-30s, suit wrinkled, hair damp, eyes sharp but tired. His expression carried confusion more than arrogance. "My car just died," he said, raising his voice over the rain. "I've tried calling for help, but there's no signal." Eileen glanced at the dashboard lights flickering weakly. "Battery or alternator," she said calmly. "Pop the hood." The man blinked. "You're a mechanic?" She didn't answer the question directly. She simply walked to the front of the car and pulled the hood latch. The rain soaked her clothes completely now, but she didn't care. She focused on the engine, shining her flashlight, her mind already working through possibilities. The man watched her silently from behind. He had expected many things that night: anger, fear, even danger. But not this. Not a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, standing confidently in a storm, treating a $1 million car like any other broken machine. "You'll need a jump," Eileen finally said. "And your alternator belt is loose. You're lucky it didn't snap." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Can you fix it?" "Yes," she replied, then added, "but not for free." For the first time, he smiled. "Fair enough." She returned to her workshop, pulled her old pickup closer, and connected the cables. Her movements were precise, practiced. No hesitation. No need to impress. Just skill. As the engine came back to life, the man stepped out of his car. Rain plastered his shirt to his body, but he didn't seem to care. He watched her work with something close to admiration. "You didn't even ask who I am," he said. Eileen shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Broken cars don't come with titles." That answer stayed with him. Inside the workshop, she tightened the belt and tested the engine again. It purred smoothly now. She stepped back, satisfied. "You're good to go," she said. "Just don't drive too fast in this weather." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, then paused. Slowly, he handed her cash, more than the job required. Eileen counted it, then handed some back. "This is extra." He looked surprised. Most people wouldn't. She met his eyes steadily. "Most people aren't me." For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, perhaps. Or curiosity. "My name's Armin," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated, wiped her hand on a rag, then shook his. "Eileen." Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The storm showed no sign of mercy. "You shouldn't drive in this," she said after a moment. "Road floods ahead. If you want, you can wait here until it calms down." He studied the small garage, the worn tools, the faint smell of oil and metal. This place was a world away from glass towers and boardrooms. "All right," he said, "if it's not too much trouble." Eileen nodded and handed him a towel. "Coffee's terrible, but it's hot." As they sat on opposite sides of the workshop, rain pouring outside, silence wrapped around them. Not awkward, but thoughtful. Two strangers from different worlds, bound together by chance and a storm. Armin watched her as she cleaned her tools, noticed the scars on her hands, the exhaustion she carried quietly. No one had ever looked at him without knowing who he was. Tonight, for the first time in years, he was just a man with a broken car. And he found he didn't want it any other way. Eileen, meanwhile, felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Curiosity without fear. She didn't know why this stranger's presence felt different. Maybe it was the way he listened, or the way he didn't look down on her. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something small and fragile had just begun. The rain didn't stop that night. It softened, turned into a steady whisper against the metal roof, but it never fully left. Hours passed without either of them noticing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking time neither of them seemed eager to acknowledge. Armin sat on a worn wooden chair, warming his hands around a chipped mug of coffee. It tasted burnt and bitter, but he didn't mention it. Eileen moved around the garage organizing tools, wiping oil stains from the floor, doing small tasks that didn't really need doing. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things unsaid. "You work alone?" Armin finally asked. Eileen nodded without looking at him. "Most of the time." "That can't be easy." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Nothing worth keeping ever is." Armin leaned back, studying the garage more closely. The walls were lined with old certificates, faded photographs, and handwritten notes taped near the workbench. One picture caught his attention, a younger Eileen standing beside an older man, both smiling, grease on their faces, arms crossed proudly. "Your father?" he asked. Eileen's movements slowed. "Yes." She hesitated, then continued, as if the words had been waiting for a listener. "He taught me everything. This garage was his. People used to laugh when they saw me holding tools as a teenager. He told me, Let them laugh now. Skill speaks louder than mouths. What happened to him? Armin asked softly. She swallowed. Heart attack. 3 years ago. No insurance. No savings. Just debt and this place. She gestured around her. Everyone told me to sell it. Said a woman couldn't survive here alone. But you did. I had to, she replied simply. This is all I have. Armin felt something tighten in his chest. He had grown up surrounded by wealth, power, and opportunity, yet this woman, who had none of those things, stood stronger than most people he knew. And you? Eileen asked suddenly. What were you doing on this road at night in a car like that? He paused. Carefully. Work. She raised an eyebrow. That's vague. He smiled faintly. I like keeping things simple. She didn't push further. She had learned long ago that everyone carried stories they weren't ready to share. As the storm eased, Eileen grabbed a blanket from a shelf and handed it to him. You can rest on that chair. I'll stay up. You don't trust me? He asked, half joking. She met his gaze steadily. I trust my instincts. And they say you're not dangerous. That answer stayed with him. They talked through the night about small things at first. Favorite foods, music, places they wished they could visit someday. Armin avoided mentioning his world of private jets and corporate power. Instead, he spoke of pressure, loneliness, and expectations without naming their source. People think having money solves everything, he said quietly. But sometimes it just builds higher walls. Eileen nodded slowly. People think having nothing makes you weak, but it teaches you how to stand alone. Somewhere between words and silence, something shifted. When dawn finally broke, pale light crept into the garage. The rain had stopped. The road outside shimmered under the early sun. Armin stood, stretching. I should go. Eileen nodded, suddenly unsure why she felt disappointed. Your car's fine now. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, plain, simple, with only a name and number. If you ever need anything, he said, handing it to her. She looked at it, then at him. I don't like favors. It's not a favor, he replied. It's an option. After a brief pause, she slipped the card into her pocket. Days passed, but Armin didn't leave her thoughts. And despite her attempts to ignore it, he returned, first with excuses about engine noises that didn't exist, then simply with coffee and conversation. He showed up dressed casually now, jeans instead of suits, his expensive watch hidden under his sleeve. He listened more than he spoke. He never acted superior. Slowly, Eileen let her guard down. One evening, as they sat on the garage steps watching traffic pass, Eileen said, You don't feel like someone who belongs where you come from. He looked at her, surprised. What makes you say that? You ask questions, she said. Powerful people usually don't. They give orders. A faint smile crossed his face. Maybe I'm tired of being powerful. Weeks turned into months. Late-night talks became routine. They shared meals, laughter, silence. He learned how she negotiated with rude customers, how she ignored insults, how she carried herself with quiet dignity. She learned that he had lost someone once, that he didn't talk to his family much, that he valued honesty above all else. But secrets have weight. One afternoon, Eileen overheard two men whispering near the road. That guy who keeps coming here, you know who he is? No idea. He looks like that billionaire from the news. Armin Khalid. Owns half the city. Her heart skipped. That night, she confronted him. Is it true? She asked, holding her phone up, a news article glowing on the screen. Armin stared at it, then at her. Yes, he said quietly. I wanted you to know me before the name did. Silence fell hard between them. So, everything was a lie? she asked, voice shaking. No, he said quickly. What I felt was real. I just didn't know how to tell you. Eileen stepped back, pain flashing across her face. You had a choice. I didn't. She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the garage, the same place where he had felt human for the first time in years. And for the first time, money couldn't fix what he had broken. The garage felt emptier after that night. The tools were still there, the engine still needed fixing, customers still came and went, but something vital had shifted. Eileen moved through her days with mechanical precision, her hands working while her mind stayed somewhere else. She avoided the road at dusk, avoided the sound of familiar footsteps, avoided hope. Armin didn't come back. At first, she told herself it was relief. The truth was out. The illusion was gone. She could return to her simple, predictable life. But predictability didn't stop her heart from tightening every time a black car passed the garage. It didn't silence the memory of late-night conversations or the way he had listened to her as if her words mattered. On the other side of the city, Armin sat in a glass-walled office high above the streets, surrounded by people who spoke to him carefully, respectfully, fearfully. Meetings blurred together. Numbers climbed. Deals closed. Everything worked exactly as it always had, except him. You look distracted, his assistant said gently during one meeting. I am, he replied honestly. For the first time in years, wealth felt heavy. Every luxury reminded him of what it had cost him. He replayed the moment in the garage over and over, her expression when she learned the truth, the betrayal in her eyes. He hadn't meant to deceive her, yet intention didn't erase impact. After a week of silence, he drove past the garage at night, stopping across the road. The lights were on. Eileen was inside, bent over an engine, focused, determined. Just like the first night. He didn't go in. He knew showing up without answers would only deepen the wound. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, a customer stormed into the garage, shouting about a delayed repair. His words turned sharp, then cruel. This is why women shouldn't do men's jobs, he sneered. Eileen's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but froze when she saw a familiar figure step between them. That's enough, Armin said calmly. The man scoffed. And who are you? Someone who knows the law, Armin replied. And someone who just heard you harass a professional. The man muttered under his breath and left. Eileen stared at Armin, anger and relief colliding in her chest. You shouldn't be here. I know, he said softly, but I couldn't stay away. She crossed her arms. What do you want? To apologize, he said. Properly. She turned away, focusing on the engine. Apologies don't erase lies. I didn't lie about who I was inside, he said quietly. I just hid the name. She finally looked at him. You had power. I didn't. That matters. He nodded. I understand now. Silence stretched between them. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. But I wanted you to know this. Meeting you reminded me who I was before the world told me who to become. Her expression softened despite herself. You don't belong in my world, Armin. Maybe not, he said, but I want to try. The weeks that followed were fragile. They spoke again cautiously, slowly. He stopped hiding, but he didn't flaunt his wealth either. He showed up as himself, no suits, no entourage. Just honesty. But the world noticed. Photos of them together surfaced online. Headlines twisted the narrative. Billionaire's new obsession. Gold digger or fairy tale? Eileen stopped checking her phone after strangers began leaving comments, judging her without knowing her. One evening, Armin invited her to dinner at a small, quiet restaurant. I can't keep pretending this won't affect you, he said. My family already knows. She stiffened. And They disapprove, he admitted. They think I'm being reckless. Eileen smiled sadly. Of course they do. They want to meet you. Her smile faded.
No.
Eileen, I won't be inspected, she said firmly. I've fought my whole life to be respected. I won't beg for it now. Armin reached for her hand. I won't let anyone humiliate you. She pulled back gently. You can't protect me from your world. A few days later, his mother arrived unannounced at the garage. Elegant.
Cold.
Her eyes swept the place with barely disguised disdain. So this is her, she said. Eileen met her gaze, without flinching. This is my workplace. This relationship is a mistake, the woman continued. You don't belong with my son. Eileen took a breath. I never asked to. But you're costing him everything, she replied sharply. That night, Eileen made a decision. She met Armin at the garage after closing. This can't continue, she said, voice steady but eyes shining. He froze. What? Your world will never accept me, she said. And I won't be the reason you lose your family. I don't care about that, he said fiercely. I do, she replied. Because loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even if it hurts. Tears slid down her face. I loved you when you were just a man with a broken car. He stepped forward. I'm still that man. She shook her head. Goodbye, Armin. She walked away, leaving him in the dark, surrounded by silence and regret. Sometimes love isn't lost because it's weak. Sometimes it's lost because it's too real for the world to handle. The days after Eileen walked away felt heavier than anything Armin had ever carried. Boardrooms, meetings, luxury cars. None of it mattered anymore. He moved through his life like a ghost, present in body, but absent in spirit. Every decision felt meaningless without the quiet strength of the woman who had seen him when he was nothing more than a stranger stranded in the rain. Eileen, meanwhile, threw herself into work with a kind of desperation. She arrived at the garage before sunrise and left long after nightfall. Her hands were constantly busy, but her heart felt hollow. Every sound reminded her of him. The crunch of tires on gravel, the low hum of an engine starting, even the smell of coffee late at night. People noticed the change in her. You okay? One regular customer asked gently. I'm fine, she replied automatically. But she wasn't. She had done what she believed was right. She had protected him from a future filled with endless conflict, whispered insults, and quiet humiliation. Still, knowing something is right doesn't stop it from hurting. Weeks passed, then months. One evening, as Eileen was closing the garage, a letter slid under the door. No return address. Just her name written carefully on the envelope. Her heart skipped as she recognized the handwriting. She didn't open it immediately. When she finally did, her hands trembled. I'm not asking you to come back, the letter read. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I've chosen to live honestly from this day forward. I stepped down from my position. I walked away from the empire everyone expected me to inherit. I don't know what comes next. I only know that losing you taught me what staying comfortable was costing me. Eileen pressed the letter to her chest, tears falling freely now. He had done what she never expected, what she never asked for. But was it too late? News spread quickly. Headlines changed. Billionaire resigns amid family rift. Analysts speculated. Friends questioned his sanity. His family tried to intervene, but Armin stood firm. For once, he said calmly, I'm choosing my life. He rented a small apartment near the edge of the city. No guards. No drivers. He learned how to cook badly and clean worse. He applied his business mind to something different, funding vocational training programs, supporting skilled workers, especially women struggling to survive in male-dominated trades. And yet, there was one thing he hadn't done. He hadn't gone back to Eileen. Not because he didn't want to, but because he respected her choice. One stormy evening, almost a year after the night that had changed everything, a familiar sound echoed down the road. A car sputtered, then died, right in front of the garage. Eileen stepped outside, rain soaking her hair, flashlight in hand. The hood was already open. Armin stood there, drenched, nervous, hope flickering in his eyes. "My car broke down," he said softly. "Again." She stared at him, 1,000 emotions crashing into one moment. "You did that on purpose." He smiled just a little. "Maybe." She sighed, then stepped forward. "Pop the hood properly. You're doing it wrong." As she worked, their old rhythm returned, easy, familiar, unforced. When she finished, she wiped her hands and looked at him. "You really walked away," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I realized something," he replied. "If love costs you your integrity, it was never love. And if wealth makes you afraid to be yourself, it's just another kind of prison." Silence fell between them, thick but warm. "I won't promise you an easy life," he continued. "I don't have the world anymore. But I have myself. And if you let me, I want to build something real with you." Eileen looked at the garage behind her, at the road ahead, at the man who had once hidden behind wealth and now stood soaked and vulnerable before her. "I won't be your escape," she said carefully. "I don't want you to be," he replied. "I want you to be my equal." Her eyes filled again. "You already lost everything." He shook his head. "I lost what didn't matter." The rain softened, just like it had that first night. Eileen took a slow breath. "Then start by making coffee. The terrible kind." He laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. As they stood there together, rain falling gently around them, it felt like the beginning of something stronger than before. Something earned. Something chosen. Not a fairy tale. A truth. The rain stopped just before sunrise. The clouds pulled apart slowly, as if the sky itself needed time to recover from everything it had poured out. Eileen stood at the entrance of the garage, watching the quiet road stretch ahead, feeling something unfamiliar settle in her chest.
Peace.
Not certainty. Not promises. Just peace. Armin stayed that night, not as a guest hiding from the storm, but as a man finally standing where he chose to be. They talked until morning, not about love at first, but about reality.
About fear.
About rebuilding life from the ground up. "I don't want to be saved," Eileen said at one point, her voice calm but firm. "I've survived my whole life without anyone rescuing me." "I know," Armin replied. "That's why I admire you. I don't want to save you. I want to stand beside you." That was the moment she knew things were different now. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Life didn't suddenly become easy, but it became honest. Armin took on work that actually mattered to him. He partnered with small workshops, helped mechanics modernize their tools, invested quietly without expecting control. He never announced his sacrifices. He never played the hero. Eileen remained exactly who she was, strong, stubborn, independent. She didn't quit the garage. She expanded it.
Slowly. Carefully.
On her terms. People talked, of course. Some mocked Armin for throwing away a kingdom. Others accused Eileen of holding him back. But for the first time, neither of them listened. One afternoon, Eileen's old delivery van broke down completely. The engine was beyond repair. She stared at it in silence, calculating costs she didn't have. "I'll handle it," Armin said instinctively. She raised a hand.
"No."
He paused. "Then let me help." She considered him for a long moment. "We'll fix it together." They did, late into the night, covered in grease, laughing when things went wrong. That old van never ran perfectly again, but it ran enough. And somehow that felt symbolic. Eileen's reputation grew. People who once laughed now waited in line for her work. Young girls came by the garage, watching her with wide eyes. "You're really a mechanic?" one asked. Eileen smiled.
Yes.
"And you can be anything you want to." Armin watched moments like that quietly, realizing this was the kind of legacy no skyscraper could ever replace. Eventually, his family reached out again. Not to apologize, but to negotiate. They offered him a position back. Power. Status. Everything he once had. All he had to do was walk away. He didn't hesitate. "I already chose," he said calmly. When he told Eileen, she didn't celebrate. She just nodded. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Because now I know what enough feels like." On a quiet evening, a year after the storm that first brought them together, Armin stood outside the garage with a small box in his hand. No cameras. No grand gestures. Eileen looked at him suspiciously. "What is that?" "Something simple," he said. "Like us." Inside was a ring, not expensive, not flashy. Just honest. "I won't promise you luxury," he said softly. "I won't promise you comfort. But I promise you respect, truth, and a life built together, not above, not below." Eileen's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was steady. "I don't need your money," she said. "I never did." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm asking." She said yes, not because he had given up a fortune, but because he had found his character. Years later, people would still tell their story. Some would call it a fairy tale. Others would say it was foolish. But those who truly understood knew the truth. A billionaire didn't fall in love with a poor mechanic because she saved his car. He fell in love because she showed him who he was when everything else was stripped away. And she didn't love him for what he owned. She loved him for who he chose to become. True love didn't change their classes. It destroyed the idea that class ever mattered. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Real love is never about money, status, or power. It's about character. It's about who stays when there's nothing to gain. Sometimes, the strongest people aren't born into comfort. They're forged in struggle. And sometimes, the greatest riches aren't found in bank accounts. They're found in the courage to choose love over fear. If you believe that kindness still matters, if you believe love can rise above class and judgment, then this story was for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us what being human truly means.